Hey, folks, Dave Manica, Chris Morrison here. We're talking about revenue is my leading indicator of failure. Here's why. Revenue is my leading indicator of failure. So, kind of sounds a little bit opposite of what people think, right? No? Yes?
Yeah, I think yes.
Okay, so people don't think you're crazy when you talk about this topic?
Yeah, no. People always think I'm crazy when I talk about this topic, but I've
Mhm.
come to learn over 30 plus years of doing this, what we're doing, what we generally are doing for launching products and disrupt products just ain't working. And when you
So
get
you have
down to it,
you have a
one of the
better.
primary things is, and David, just recently I ran across another article it's the first time I've ever seen anybody else talking about this. A
That's
venture
good.
capitalist out of California talks about revenue being a dangerous North Star.
All
So,
right. Excellent.
so
Excellent. It makes sense though, and so we're going to dig into it, but
yeah.
ultimately it's not the first thing people think about, and like you're going to be presenting and talking about, that's part of the problem.
Yeah, I'll tell you, Dave, my whole agile market entry sales framework that I've developed, I kind of learned over the years I have to be a little bit dramatic to get the attention of salespeople because
Yeah.
it's not the way people think. But I'll tell you, in
Well,
this
you do
day,
like drama.
what's that?
You do like drama.
I do like drama a little bit. Well, I like stirring up the pot a lot. That I do love doing.
Oh,
I
that's
love
right.
stirring the pot. There's no
We have
doubt about
talked
that.
about that
But
before.
David,
Yeah.
this time I'm not really doing that because it's actually what I've learned. It's actually true. This idea of people focusing on revenue being problematic is probably the most common thing I see.
No, no, I
And
hear
you and
you.
I have talked about this. The
I'm
innovation
going
death
through this.
spiral. It's one of the leading.
It's a leading one of my clients. It's driven all money and effort totally around looking at bookings and revenue and not discovering. So we're
Yep.
going to talk about that revenue isn't the primary KPI. So remember, not the primary key performance indicator. So we're going to talk about why that is the case, why revenue isn't.
Not only, David, is why it isn't, but it's dangerous when it is.
That's right.
That's the other thing that I think we want to drive home here early on is not only is it not the right one to be looking at, but also when you do are driven by that, and particularly with disruptive technology, like we're always talking about, it actually is dangerous to have revenue be your primary indicator of success.
And then
That's
we're
what
going to talk about
prevents.
then you're going to talk about what is that North Star.
Yeah, we'll get into that.
Okay.
So, but yeah, yeah. So,
Now,
but yeah,
before we get going, folks, comments, thoughts,
oh yeah.
ideas, anything you'd like to share, throw that in the chat. People can look at your thoughts and ideas. They can think about them. Chris and I can comment about them appropriately. I mean, the one thing we'd love to hear from folks would be when you experience this situation where revenue is a very poor indicator of success and how that impacted the organization's ability to either significant pivot or drive a disruptive product. So, Chris.
Yeah, David, by the way, on that note, I expect people to challenge me a little bit or us a little bit on this one today because it is a bit controversial making this
Oh
statement.
yeah, totally is. Totally is.
So
Totally.
I would welcome people, challenge us on this. Tell
All
us
right,
why it's not.
so here you go, buddy. Revenue is really the lifeblood of sales, right?
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
the core of why you get a lot of sales professionals in this business. Revenue drives commissions, drives money in my pocket so I can buy my boat, my car, my fancy house, my second lake house, all that good stuff. But why is it dangerous? So tell us, come on, get into the meat of this. Why is it dangerous?
So, when we talk about the life of sales, there's kind of like this hidden, I don't know, hidden maybe, or it's unrecognized or undistinguished. There's something that every sales team needs. Well, two things here. One is for a company to be successful with the launch of a new product, there's an inflection point on the revenue curve, and it's when they get to scale. And that, so what we should be focusing on is what does it take to get to scale, not how do we get revenue in the door. That's kind of like one of the most fundamental things. So to have a successful startup company, you've got to get to scale. for a product launch, to have a successful product launch where actually start making money, you have to get sales to scale. And there's one thing that
scale. What is scale to you?
So scale from a metrics, from a number standpoint is, that, when you get that hockey stick, when you make that transition hockey stick.
Can scale also be, though, the fact that you found an easier way to make the sales? You have a repeatable way that isn't scale also the fact you found a repeatable way to make those sales?
Well, yeah, that's my point. Until you have let me put it this way.
I think it's better to say it's a repeatable model. You're looking for the repeatable model first.
You're looking for you can't get, you can't get the scale without it. You can't scale without a repeatable.
I agree. I am in real world, last year and a half in 2 companies, I cannot scale without a repeatable model unless it's Herculean effort or just dumb luck or a blind squirrel finds a nut.
Even the Herculean effort doesn't get you get you the scale, because you're either adding a whole bunch of resources, right? You're either adding a whole bunch of salespeople because they're not operating at efficiency. Without a repeatable process, they can't operate at efficiency.
It won't be efficient. That's right.
So they're operating at 20, 30, 40% efficiency, whereas a professional sales organization should be operating at 70, 80%, somewhere in that range. So either you got to add a whole bunch of salespeople to get the numbers up, which means you're just increasing your burn rate, or you've got to go get a bazillion leads.
Yep.
And generate a bazillion leads, of which you're only going to close a small percentage. You're not going to have efficiency there unless
each lead costs $30 to $100. You're burning cash that way. Which way are you going to burn cash?
Either way, you don't get the scale. So you need this is
unless you get lucky. Unless you get lucky.
Well, you can find repeatability by getting lucky, but the chances of that, particularly if you're really disrupting a market and changing, the chances of getting lucky are really, really, really slim. You got to.
So you and I both know, based on our experience, that what happens is you have the founder and the product people. They come up with a cool product. The founder's into it. The founder knows people. They're talking, but then they're told by the first seed round funders, go out and buy a bunch of salespeople, go out and buy your marketing capability, and start spending money generating outbound marketing activities and outbound selling activities, and see what happens.
Yep. And that just creates a bigger problem. That just drives up your burn.
Yep.
Even faster. And unless you have a repeatable process to execute that burn against, you're going to have no efficiency in the organization, on your sales team, in your marketing effort.
The board comes in quickly and says, I don't like your CAC. I don't like your sales cost as a percentage of revenue. And then it defeats all your forward momentum associated with maybe pivots and adjustments you have to make, because now you're doing micromanagement on something that shouldn't be micromanaged because you shouldn't be doing in the first place.
You shouldn't be doing in the first place. And this gets us back to, and all that stuff that's driven by the board, by the upper level management, is driven around this concept that we've got to drive revenue up as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And that's why I say revenue is my leading indicator of success, of failure, because when I see that with a disruptive product, I know they're not going through the learning that they need to go through to figure out the repeatable sales process, which is what's required by the sales team and the individual sales rep to get the scale.
All right,
so I know none of that's going on.
Let's help these guys out a little bit, because we talked about the repeatable sales process, you call RSP, a lot in these sessions.
Yes.
Give them an example from your perspective of what a repeatable sales process is.
So I kind of map it out. When you look at the sales process, typically you're looking at, the sales cycle from, the sales team gets a lead, they drive it to close, and they get out. The repeatable sales process starts way before that. And, a lot of this is common sense, but it's also the things that companies aren't doing.
Yeah.
So it starts with who's your primary customer, who's your target customer, and what's the problem you're solving for them.
So your persona and your problem, and it matches. The persona, you solve a problem for the persona you think in such a way that they're willing to give you money.
You can
find that point. And you can find that persona.
What's that?
And you can find that persona.
And you can, yes, you can identify it, and you can find it, you can locate it, you can target it.
And then you can give
So
them
the first
content.
part is that. Then the second part is a repeal. So it's, okay, what's the message that's going to get that persona to respond, right? And that you have to figure out in your early sales. That's that's the sales team for you. Then that message, you take that message back to marketing. By the way, this is backwards. Marketing shouldn't lead messaging at the product launch.
Isn't that
Sales
hilarious?
should lead
Oh my
messaging.
gosh. Oh my, it drives me absolutely crazy. I was at one startup and marketing was supposed to give it the messaging. It's like the people using the product, the salespeople, anybody talk to any customer should do the messaging because they know what people are saying.
Yep. And they
It
know
really is backwards, isn't it?
it's this one's backwards. So you figure out what the market entry point. People call it beachheads. I don't like beachhead because it's not precise enough. Then you take that beachhead and you figure out how they're going to respond. This is all happens in the conversation between the sales team and the customer. Then you take that messaging back to marketing. They create lead generation tactics that they then test. So this is, and then now you have two things going on. You have the lead generation and the sales, and the sales teams are starting to figure out the sales cycle together, because now you have enough leads coming in that the sales team can work enough leads to start figuring out what the sales cycle.
So basically your process becomes, here's a persona, here's the messaging to the persona. You can make it.
Here's the lead gen tactics.
Here's how you do this is how they respond. This is the type of lead you're getting. This is how many times you have to connect with them.
Yep.
This is the type of content you have to get them through the process. Here's the pricing you should be giving them in the price range. Here's a template for the proposal, and then here's how you book.
And here's how you close them. But when you figure out the repeatable sales process, that's where sales pretty much stops. But it doesn't stop there when you figure out the repeat. Now you have to figure out what the post-sale, what the adoption cycle is. What I kind of refer to as going from a happy buyer to a highly satisfied customer.
Yeah,
you got to figure out that. You got to figure out the adoption that then becomes the repeatable.
But doesn't that move over more to customer success? You move isn't that moving more to customer success?
It is, but this is all driven from that early customer.
I got you.
So it's all and in every complex sale, especially when it's disruptive, the person that owns that relationship with the customer is the sales rep. So these early sales reps have to carry it all the way through. So yes,
and we talked about how that sales rep can't be a typical salesperson in the previous LinkedIn.
Yeah, well, there's a classic article. There's a Harvard Business Review article. I suggest everybody go out and find it. It's absolutely brilliant. It's called The Sales Learning Curve by Charles Holloway, and I forget the other authors of it. But they coined this term, this Renaissance rep.
Yeah.
And you and I have talked about this.
You and
I spent a whole live stream on this. That creative mind as well as the execution mind, finding that all in one. That's the Renaissance rep. So yes. I
can tell you right now, this repeatable sales process is so critical. I mean, even in my SoftEd organization in the U.S., I'm still trying to figure out the repeatable sales process, and we're still having to make revenue goals as I'm still trying to figure it out. So it is Herculean. It's relationship right now. Yep. Dumb luck, a base model. So here we go. We made all this preaching about why, if you make revenue your key, your number one indicator, you're screwed. So where is your North Star? So
the North Star, this is kind of be weird, I guess, or I don't know. Your North Star is time. So, and this is so Dave, look at the revenue curve.
Look at my face.
So we have the revenue curve. You have on the x-axis, you got time. On the y-axis, you got revenue, right? We're focused on the revenue side of it, right? That's what we focus on. But if you look at the curve in the beginning, it's flat. It's damn near flat. The critical thing is not the revenue. The critical thing is how much time does it take to get to the inflection of the curve, right?
That depends on the research that you're doing, the process you follow to do that.
It depends on how fast you figure out who your target audience is and what their problem is and what the messaging that's going to get them interested. It's going to figure how fast you're going to be able to move them through the sales cycle to get them to the close. How fast you're going to learn the sales cycle so you can drive that, that first customer, your sales cycle is going to be the longest of any customer. So over time, you drive, a sales cycle might start at 6 months, but after your 10th customer, you might have that down to 3
now
months.
I hear how you're articulating. You're saying that the time indication is when you start tightening up your window of lead to sale, that's giving you a better understanding that you have a repeatable sales process. Your first sales time might be 6 months, but then if you start getting closer to 3, 2, depending on your product, then you're saying, okay, that's an indicator that I found repeatability.
But that's just a piece of the repeatable sales process. Remember, so the first thing you have to figure, so early on, it's figuring out who your customer is and what the problem you're solving for them. You got to get to that as quick. And once you get, so each step of the process, your KPIs are going to change as you drive through the learning process to get to a repeatable sales process. So if you look at this repeatable sales process as these steps, unfortunately, most of the steps are sequential. So you have to figure out the first step, get the second step. And the question is, how fast can you go through that learning process to get the whole repeatable sales process teased out, right? So, yeah. And at that point in time, now you have a chance of inflecting up your revenue curve. Now you have a chance of scaling. Now, when you bring on additional sales folks, you get professional sales persons, you give them the repeatable sales process, they can hit the ground running instead of having to go through this learning process on their own.
And so key here then is about the learning. So you want time so you can learn.
And the problem is when we focus on revenue, we're not focused on the learning that has to take place, the discovery that has to take place to get us to that inflection in the revenue curve. And what we essentially end up doing is that early flatness in the curve, instead of shortening it to get into the inflection, we actually extend it by focusing on revenue, because we're focusing on executing and bringing in revenue, not figuring out what the repeatable sales process that's going to get us to inflection. So this is why it's so dangerous to focus on revenue. Instead of shortening the time to the inflection in the revenue curve, we actually extend the time to the inflection in the revenue curve. That's what kills all these startup companies.
Yes, you do agile market entry. You're going to tighten that time to revenue. But so, what is the key indicator that says you have scaled? You have found it.
So I would look at key revenue. So I recommend, and I always start with a small team. And in startups, you always do start with a small team. When you have 3 to 5 reps executing efficiently using the same sales model, now you probably have a very repeatable sales process. So, when you can manage,
might be dumb luck.
What's that?
The one might be dumb luck. So you have your Renaissance salesperson following AME, right? Then you bring another salesperson in, they might be successful just from dumb luck. What you're saying is if you have 2 to 3 salespeople processing, you can see the fact that the model that the Renaissance person put in place is actually scaling.
Correct.
Okay.
When you have multiple reps executing the same model effectively, now you're adding at least that. What you'll find is that the early reps, first of all, the messaging will work, and they'll start sharing. They'll start using the same messaging, and you'll start seeing going from lead to qualified lead will you'll get more efficient there. And then you'll start moving down the sales cycle pipeline, and you'll start seeing them close more efficiently and quickly. And predictably, you'll see them turn, so, you got to get this repeatability across multiple sales reps in order to get there.
Look at Steven's comment. Did you see it?
No, I haven't.
Look at this. So his thought process is that a focus on revenue basically takes away the responsibility of finance, leadership, and marketing and throws it on the sales VP. And do we not see that all the time?
Yeah, so that, and I was thinking, I was thinking that about that exact thing on my bike ride this morning. This idea of giving the sales team a repeatable sales process, and by the way, I've worked with Steven in the past, and he's one of the best Renaissance reps I've ever worked with.
Mhm.
It is the responsibility of the leadership to deliver this to the sales team, but it's not what happens. Most leadership teams, VPs of sales, marketing, they give them, marketing gives you a brochure and a PowerPoint presentation. The VP of sales gives you the same materials and a quota and tells you to go do your job. But what ends up happening is leadership hasn't given the sales rep the core thing they need to do a job. What a professional sales person does is they execute a repeatable process.
So here's my ballot. This is so funny. This is so funny because this happened.
Stephen's dead on. It's leadership.
This happened in the
responsibility.
This happened in the company I'm supporting, and the fact that revenue is the indicator, and all focus was on why isn't sales getting opportunities? Why aren't they getting meetings? Why aren't they getting pipeline? And as we're going through the process, nobody's saying, well, maybe what they're selling isn't right, or maybe who they're selling to isn't right. And it's like, I'm driving me crazy. I'm like, man, if you follow a certain sales process, and this is what's happening, is we're trying to put a product into an existing sales process.
Yes. Yes. And most salespeople aren't Renaissance reps. They can't figure this stuff out. Most salespeople don't. You have to drop them into an efficient, repeatable process, and that's frankly what every sales rep's been trained to do. So if you ask your sales force to do this, they're going to fail. Yeah. But you're absolutely correct, David. This is not a question about the sales force, and this is, this is why, putting pressure on the sales force, increasing their quotas, it just doesn't work. This is the responsibility of leadership to provide to a professional sales force to execute. And this is why you should start. Well,
how does this look? Have you ever seen a planning document? But how does this look? So if I'm going to go, so I'm a founder. I got a really cool product idea. All right, I'm actually an AME, Agile Market Entry, disciple, acolyte. How do I present this? Because the first thing the first thing venture is going to want is, let me see your hockey stick revenue goals.
Yep.
So, but hey, you know what? I'm going to show you that I need 6 months to learn.
So I think there's a bunch of different things. One is, and I've seen this. So I'm working with a company. I just started working with a company right now, and they have a product that's FDA cleared already, and they're waiting another 12 to 18 months to start selling that product. So this is one of the other mistakes that sales teams do, is that we should start selling products much earlier, much earlier. Okay. Now you can't have
a different group to sell it, right?
What's that? Well, you need a different skill set to sell that early on. We've talked about that. But this particular company, they're going to do a clinical study at 3 sites before they start selling the product. And I recommended them start selling that product today. Mm-hmm. They have FDA clearance. They can sell that product. Start selling it today.
But they're selling it using the Renaissance rep, using Agile Market Entry techniques to find out where the opportunity is.
Yes, that's my recommendation to them. No, as an Agile Market, now from a discovery mindset, right? If they go sell today, if they sell nothing, that's not a bad outcome early on. Because remember, they're still starting this process 18 months sooner than they're planning to start it. So if we start it today,
failure is not necessarily bad, but what's your
best case scenario, Dave? They actually do sell some, and they get all the learnings that they get from selling that product, right? They figure out pricing, they figure out the messaging, they figure out who the key stakeholders are, they start learning the sales process. In this case, they're selling in the hospital. They figure out how to start dealing with the value committee and all that type of stuff. That's the best case scenario. And they get revenue. The worst case scenario is they don't sell anybody. They probably get some free pilots, and they go through that learning process, but still they're starting to have all these learnings around who the customer is, how to talk to the customer, what the decision process is, what the pricing is, how to competitively position it. Who the early adopter persona is. The hypothesis around the early adopter. Is it true? Is it not true? They start learning all these things. So one of the things is we can start much earlier and hedge our bets so that when we go to launch, we have a lot of these learnings that are already taking place so that we get out of the gate much faster and much more efficient.
So basically you launched to the regular sales team after you completed your your agile market entry process.
Well, you should not launch to the regular sales team until you have a repeatable process to hand them, because 90% of your regular sales team are not these Renaissance reps. They won't go through this. You'll just be wasting their time and wasting your company's time and money by doing that. So
now, what type of documentation do you want? So revenue is not my leading indicator. Revenue is easy to document, right? It's easy to see. It's going to come up in pipelines, it's going to come out in bookings, and it's going to come out in closed.
Yep.
It's going to come out with delivery. Yep. So what type of documentation do you want, and where would you be putting this documentation in this process?
What do you mean putting it?
Like, would you put it in the CRM? Would you put it on a shared drive for people to review? Yeah, where would you stick it?
Well, remember early on, these are going to be small teams learning. So I think more important than keeping track of that stuff, and I don't want to say that that's unimportant. The more important thing that we tend not to do on sales teams is share learnings across the team very quickly. So you say you have 3 or 5 reps out selling this product out of the gate, this Renaissance team doing the agile market entry. The most important thing is them interacting between each other very quickly. Say, hey, this is working, this is not working. Let's try to, let's share what's working. So we start practicing it across other reps and see if it works across 2 or 3 or 4 reps instead of just one. So that's probably much more important than the metrics you're tracking, because remember, we're going to be working with small numbers early on. And as a team, we're going to be able to keep track of those. And as a leader of that team, you're going to keep track of them. Now, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be. We should be keeping track of how many people we're calling on, who we're calling on, what type of response we're getting from. But the more important thing from that is not just tracking those metrics, but again, sharing what's working in those conversations so we can see if that starts working.
And sharing it with marketing, right? Shouldn't a marketing person be on that team?
Yes, of course they should be, but they got to be on that team as well. Got to be is not the right word. The market person should be very interested in being on that team.
They should be listening. They should be listening and writing and documenting.
They should be listening and writing, because they should realize everything that they're building should be coming out of the information they're getting back from the reps. That's not the way most marketing teams interact.
What I like to see a rough draft persona, and that changes to that persona as the team learns, and then be able to say, okay, here's where, rough draft A, now we're on rough draft 17. Here's the differences in the persona document. This is the persona we can scale on.
And marketing could lead that effort if they come into this with this good discovery learning mindset and try to start pulling this out. And they should. Marketing should be on that team. R&D should be on that team. Customer service should be on that team. Yeah. But I think one of the key things that has to shift for this to really work is sales has to lead this team.
Yeah.
Because sales is the one that's engaging with the customer and pulling and having firsthand knowledge of these learnings.
The thing the big thing about this, as revenue is not the leading indicator, is that sales has a tendency to be a manufacturing line mindset. Put metrics and numbers into it. They follow a process. They will be successful. And we both know that is true if they have the right process. But this is where sales has to be the creative, the testing, the thoughtful approaches, and sharing those approaches. They have to work to build it. And I think people don't necessarily see sales that way. They might see business developers that way a little bit, but the common entrepreneur and startup investor doesn't see sales like this.
No, they don't. But this is an interesting track to take, David. So yes, but the common entrepreneur and the common investor doesn't get what you and I are talking about right now.
No, because we're all trained that sales just has to follow a process with somebody yelling at them every day. tracking their metrics and they're making their calls and everything's going to work out okay.
But David, this is why the launch of disruptive technology is so the metrics are so miserable.
Yeah.
There's two reasons why. One is that it's one of the hardest things in doing business because we're doing something for the very first time, not just us, but the customer. So inherently it's difficult and challenging. But number two is we're doing the wrong things. We're using growth stage sales concepts, principles, tactics, management styles to be doing it. And those are all driven by a foundation of executing a repeatable sales process.
Yeah.
You apply those
manufacturing line. A lot of people see sales as basically a manufacturing line. And as long as the people are performing on the manufacturing line to the specifications that we have set, everything's going to work out all right. But the problem is in disruptive product, the specifications, you have no idea what they are.
And that's why I call this agile market entry instead of sales. Now, I do call agile market sales framework, but it's because we have this mindset around sales that we're living with that doesn't allow people to shift the way they think for this stage of the product cycle. But if you look at this stage of the product development cycle, it requires something completely different. It requires something different from the sales team. It requires something different from the company leadership. And it requires something when I say company leadership, the CEO and the CFO particularly, and then that gets driven down through the R&D team and the marketing team and the sales team. But it also requires something different from the investors that have to read.
That's the biggest point out of this is that when you look at revenue is my leading indicator of failure, investors have to become mature in their ability to understand disruptive launch. Yep. Not to go back to the same old throw a sales team together. I want outbound reps. I want some business development reps. I want you giving these people leads based on this presumed persona and go after it.
Yep.
All right. Any additional questions?
And by the way, just a quick thing.
Anything you want to leave us with?
What's that?
Anything you want to leave us with?
Yeah. One is I want to comment on Steve's last comment here is that VCs invest monies in young companies get drunk on monies. I think when you see companies that have less money, they tend to do this better. Number one. The other thing is, I just leave us with is that, if you see or if you're involved with a company and their technology is disruptive and they're trying to drive revenue, to me, my caution, my red flag of danger starts, danger, Will Rogers or Will Rogers.
Yeah, there you go.
Just if you see that happening, start thinking in that and start thinking about a different way to approach it. And the main shift that you have to make, Dave, is this shift from execution mindset to this discovery learning mindset.
We have a great tactical question in front of you. Take a look at this tactical question. I love it. So when I look at that question, my thought process is it's going to be more like an 80-20 base salary versus bonus. Yeah. You're buying a talent. That's first off. And that 20% to me is going to be tied to, specific metrics around connections, learning, next stage, what is the next stage that you got to?
So the other thing I would add to that, David, is you want that early team to be compensated as a team as well as in individuals. That's one thing that's fundamentally different than sales teams typically. And the reason why is that team has to be working together. They need to be learning together and growing together. So yes, your 80-20 rule shifts, but the thing that they get compensated most on, the thing that they get compensated on, they should get compensated richly for this is delivering a repeatable sales process to the sales team. If they do that, you now take a whole sales force. Let's say it's a team of 4 or 5. You then roll out to a sales force of 100. You now have a sales force of 100 sales reps that have the opportunity to be operating at 70-80% efficiency instead of 20 or 30% efficiency.
So 80-20
that has a huge economic impact on the product launch in the company.
80-20, 20%'s got to be around learnings.
Yes.
And then a bonus tied to delivery of that repeatable process.
Yep.
All right. It's interesting. That's a hard one because there's an interesting question coming up. Why would you deploy infantry before you spec an operation with special forces?
But we do it. almost every time we launch a product, that's exactly what Don's saying here. That's exactly
Did I lose
what
you,
we
Chris?
do. What's that?
Okay, that's right. No, we just closed out for a second. That's exactly what you do. You do. We had a whole presentation on that. So Don is tying directly into stuff that you talked about. Now, here's the rubber, and I agree with this. And this is what I was pushing back a little bit on. What are those key drivers? There's got to be some, because people like tangibles.
So David,
I mean, this is
yes, you're right. It does become sales, but it gets it becomes sales. So we're not tracking sales. You're tracking sales, but sales is evidence that we're moving through the learning process or not. It's sales and revenue becomes are we heading in the right direction or not? So here's the key drivers, and this is where Mr. Tuber 44. So we're missing something fundamental here when we keep looking for the key drivers. The key thing we're doing today was premature scaling. So we're ramping up the sales and marketing efforts. That means we're spending millions and millions of dollars that we're wasting. Mm-hmm. So first of all, one of the key drivers is keeping our burn rate down on the sales.
Now you're talking.
That'll save us millions right up front. And
key driver number one is controlling burn rate.
Is controlling burn rate early on, and that's
and
the
burn rate to sales. Like you could do a ratio between burn rate to sales. You can say, look at this burn rate to sales versus this burn rate to sales.
Yep.
Then you want to get to burn rate to repeatable sales is going to be better than burn rate that you have.
As soon as we have a repeatable sales process, then we should see a huge leap in our burn rate. Because then we should be scaling up.
Now you're not even have a burn rate because you're going to be putting cash down the bottom line. You're going to be actually be able to put some G&A money down.
So the metric becomes your total, your cost versus revenue, tracking that, because we're doing the opposite now. We're scaling up our revenue and skyrocketing. We're spending.
Sales is an indicator. It's just not a key indicator. Ratio between burn and initial sales is an indicator.
That's a huge indicator early on. So, and if we look at that in most launches today, the number is really skewed.
Yeah. I see.
You're dealing with that company you're dealing with now that's got out ahead of their skis, and you're not trying to catch up. You're burning way too much.
Not hiring a bunch of salespeople. I got into big fights about it because it just wasn't logical at that time. We hadn't learned yet. All right, let's see.
We got to wrap up, David. We're way over.
All right, so folks, thank you very much. This recording's available if you want to share it with folks. Appreciate the feedback and interaction. Chris, have a great 4th of July weekend. For any Americans on here, happy 4th of July weekend. For everybody else, enjoy your weekend and your entry into summer. Unless you're in the Southern Hemisphere, your entry into winter. Peace.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for all the comments today.